All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly Podcast. I'm here live right now with my podcast partner, Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor of Life Sciences here at Mass Device. Chris Newmarker, good day, sir.
Good day.
It's a busy week. It's quarterly week.
Yes, it
quarterly
is.
Month, I guess.
We're just cranking out these earnings reports.
So I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to these quarterly reports. I like to listen to these calls and read the transcripts. Not all of them, of course, because I am not insane, but the big ones. And I know you folks parse through them as well.
I tell you, it's riveting reading. I'd suggest it all the time. It's better than Tolstoy. It's just.
But you can pick up on some things. And I think what was particularly interesting about the timing of these quarterly reports was the fact that this is the second time companies have had to step up and speak to analysts after the pandemic has set in. So the first time, April, May, was like, I don't know, this is weird. Second time, they're definitely getting their footing. They're trying to identify trends and things they can act on as a company. So
well, yeah, and as he said, it's kind of like, earlier this year, we had a lot of executives, saying that the second quarter was going to be really tough. Now we've had the second quarter, and this is just a really good opportunity now with all these earnings calls to hear from the CEOs and like, okay, what are the big trends now? What's the quote unquote new normal now that we're just kind of in this pandemic?
And going through this list, we just sort of identified 10 items, 10 important trends within medtech that we really do have to keep an eye on. So we thought we'd run through them and then provide some snippets from the quarterly calls, just to kind of reinforce the point. So we'll start at number 10, Mr. Newmarker.
One of the really big trends we've noticed is that we're seeing this trend of a lot of companies are kind of like burying the hatchet on IP and infringement lawsuits and really lawsuits in general. We've had legal experts in the space kind of suggest this was going to happen because companies just don't have as much money available. They don't feel as comfortable to spend a bunch of money on legal battles. So they're saying, it's better to make peace here and move on. So we've seen settlements between Abbott and Edwards Life Sciences when it comes to IP. We've seen there was another big, IP peace treaty between Medtronic and Tandem Diabetes Care. And then just the other day, when Bayer, the huge, European, pharma company that also has a little bit of medical devices too. They made in their quarterly announcement that they were setting aside nearly $1.4 billion, as they said, the pace was quickening on, getting some kind of settlement with the, tens of thousands of, women in the United States who have, complaints over its Essure birth control device, which isn't sold here in the US anymore, but it's definitely one of the big, just one of the really big problems in the industry in recent years. But it looks like there's a chance we might be seeing a huge settlement over Essure coming down.
And that was interesting news, and that's obviously a huge amount for them to set aside. So this came up in a few of the quarterly calls, and we're going to pull a comment from Mike Musellem, the CEO of Edwards Life Sciences. He was asked basically, what are the benefits of putting these IP fights behind them. So we're going to pick up this first clip right in the middle of a question being asked by Rick Wise of Stifel. Rick is asking about the settlement between Abbott and Edwards over the patents regarding transcatheter mitral and tricuspid repair products. Let's listen.
When I think about over the last few decades, honestly, and these kinds of agreements, it's often been a positive for the companies signing it because the bar is raised on competition, et cetera. So what are the implications, the broader implications? It's nice to have it done. I get that part.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. We're passionate about this whole area of being able to help these mitral and tricuspid patients. When you're involved in a lawsuit, it just consumes a lot of energy. It not only consumes the energy of the legal team, but it pulls much of the senior team into it. It pulls our field teams into it. It pulls our R&D teams into it. And it's just a distraction. So instead of having people focused on how can I do great things for patients, how do I advance this therapy, you're involved in some kind of a chess match. So it's a real joy for us to say that time-consuming distraction is gone, and we can focus on the exciting innovations that help patients that are suffering from valve disease.
All right, so that's interesting that this is a time to sort of focus on the future. And another way that companies are focusing on the future is just holding on to what is theirs. And this was another point made by Mike Musalem. Was interesting that you and I, we love the innovation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're really covering medtech.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see seeing more things that can just really improve people's lives and save lives.
But what's interesting is that at this time when there's so much uncertainty, we're seeing that there's an opportunity for incumbents to sort of fend off the disruptors, because the disruptors can't get in there. They can't show their new tech. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But this was another point that Mike Musalem was asked about. Basically, as an incumbent technology, as an incumbent company, do they have a benefit in fending off challengers, at least until normalcy returns? So let's hear what Mike Musalem had to say on this.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, there may have been some advantage that we're the incumbent, but maybe the bigger issue is that we've got some really trustworthy and proven results. We've got, people can count on the Sapien platform in terms of how it's going to perform. They don't have to worry so much about a pacemaker that's going to mean that a patient has to stay in the hospital longer. Very little chance of ICU. So they just have more confidence in the system. And frankly, there's just not many opportunities if you have something brand new to be able to train centers. And so there is some advantage, but I almost think the bigger advantage is from having a reliable system.
Number 10 was the settlement of litigation. Number 9 is the power of the incumbency. Number 8, really, this came up in several calls. It was just the look at the primary customers for medtech, the hospitals, and where they are. I mean, the financial hit upon hospitals has been clear from the start. We've talked about this. The onset of COVID has kept out nearly all other patients, at least initially, cutting into their revenue. And that loss of revenue has diminished the appetite for somewhat larger capital items. But medtech executives do see a room for optimism.
Yeah, optimism sounds good. Better than the opposite, I guess. But okay, so here we've got Intuitive Surgical CEO Gary Gotthard, talking about utilization of their systems. He says they are down, 27%, and the company's definitely seeing a slow in demand right now for surgical robotics.
Sure. So we did see, as we reached the end of the quarter, we did see additional postponements of purchases. And we did hear from hospitals that they were back to evaluating their budget, thinking about what the ramifications of the costs of COVID treatment were, as well as thinking about, the longer-term impacts of COVID in terms of a potential recession and impact on their funds. And so I think, the quarter was affected, the capital quarter was affected by COVID. And going forward, you're right. There will be, first, we think, the impact of trying to bring back up systems to fuller utilization. 27% is a pretty steep decline. And we would expect that they will seek to fill that before they go out and buy more capital, particularly when they're already strained on the financial side. So I think we started to see it this quarter, and I think we're going to continue to see pressures on capital spend.
All right, so that's Gary Gotthard of Intuitive. Just continuing with that call, Rick Wise, one of the analysts, noted that 40% of robotic surgeons that they surveyed said that they're going to hold off on purchases. So Gotthard accepted that. He said that capital will become available again once procedures are up, once more systems are needed. In parallel, the company is going to continue to focus on improving their products and developing new features, and that in turn will make their devices more attractive and more desirable and more likely to be purchased. But another possible positive outcome for medtech would be the increase in dollars from different sources.
Right, including like some of the federal bailout funds for for health providers.
Exactly. Yeah, Kevin Lobo, the CEO of Stryker, notes that the Federal Relief CARES Act committed $175 billion. It's only dispersed $115 billion. So that's $60 billion just kind of waiting to be handed out.
I guess we're going to hear from Kevin now on what they're going to do about that. Maybe they could get some of that money.
Exactly. Yeah. No, Kevin's going to talk about the money flowing in from hospitals And also their opportunity for them to increase financing. He's actually has, as he'll say, a pleasant surprise for demand for Mako surgical systems. So let's hear from Kevin Lobo, CEO of Stryker.
Okay, great. Well, so first of all, starting off with the CARES Act, so $175 billion has been authorized to go to hospitals. Only $115 billion has actually been dispersed, so there's still another $60 billion to be dispersed, and that's prior to the next round of legislation, right? So then the next stimulation package will add to that. And so money is flowing to the hospitals. We were really pleased with the performance of medical, obviously. Small capital tends not to be as much of a worry. They need it to do the procedures. So that's why it tends to trend very, very closely with elective procedures. They need power tools to do the knee replacement. They need the cameras to do the general surgery products. So that tends never to be really hit too much. It's more the large capital that tends to be the constraint. But because of the coronavirus, a lot of our large capital in terms of beds and stretchers were actually necessary, and we saw those being purchased. Mako was really a pleasant surprise in the quarter to see the amount of robots we were able to install. There was more financing than normal, I would say, in the second quarter, as hospitals tried to conserve as much short-term cash as they could. But it's hard to predict how this is going to play out over the course of the year. I would say for now we're feeling very good about the state of our businesses. Internationally, we had a terrific performance out of medical, and a lot of that is the governments around the world really saying this is really important to have Lucas chest compression devices, very important to have ICU beds, etc. And so we had just a terrific performance. We also don't have Sage is a much smaller business for medical outside the United States, so that weighed heavily on our U.S. performance. We actually had strong medical capital in the United States as well. But we're feeling very good about the state of the capital business. It's not like the last time where you didn't have this kind of stimulation from the government going directly into hospitals, and hospitals are very motivated to increase their procedures.
All right, well, just to recap, at number 10, we had settlement litigation as being a big issue in medtech. Number 9 is the power of incumbency, the ability to hold on to territory. Number 8 is a recognition that hospitals are hurting. And now let's take a look at number 7, which is an accelerated push into interventional tools.
Well, talking about hospitals, medtech executives, they're giving hospitals high marks for, for managing, the second surge of COVID-19 cases. They've been able to, treat new cases without completely shutting down, parts of their hospitals. But at the same time, they're also moving, there's been a move to get more patients into surgical procedures and outpatient settings. And, tell me if I'm right, right about this, Tom, but I mean, this was kind of a trend before the pandemic began, right?
Certainly was, but I think like everything we've seen, the pandemic has been sort of an accelerant and really is advancing trends. And as Mike Mahoney at Boston Scientific notes in this next clip from their call, it's going to be an even bigger part of their business going forward. So let's hear from Mike Mahoney.
Yeah, so it's a big part of our business now, with especially divisions like neuromodulation, urology, peripheral interventions. So it makes up a big slice of our business today in a pre-COVID world. And now in a COVID world, you're seeing hospitals, not radically, but shifting more procedures that are possible to an outpatient setting. And so we think that makes sense, given the fact that we're primarily an interventional medicine company. We think that's a long-term tailwind and where you want to be positioned versus potentially more of a surgically oriented company. We're trying to really disrupt surgical with less invasive approaches, especially in our endo business. So we think long-term, it's the right position for the company to be in. And many patients prefer the outpatient setting, and hospitals are shifting as appropriately some of their mix to that setting. So we think that's all favorable for Boston and strategically the direction we're headed in.
Okay, so here we are at number 6. We've covered number 10, litigation. Number 9, the power of incumbents. Coming in number 8 are hospitals hurting but finding capital. And number 7 is an increased or accelerated move toward interventional. Let's focus on the companies themselves. Kristen, your analysis of the earnings report, companies are all over, not all over the map, but in some cases they're cutting costs. One thing we haven't really talked is just the costs associated with COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and kind of the fact that, okay, yeah, I mean, there is this focus, wow, I mean, for many companies, you're seeing like these declines, and sometimes really large declines in revenue right now. And there's a lot of talk, like, well, but, we're going to still innovate. This is our opportunity as big medtech companies to continue innovating. But, that costs money, and, I think one thing this is going to be an interesting clip because we've got like Matt Taylor, an analyst with a UBS, asking Baxter's, CFO, Jay Saccaro, to, break down 120 million extra costs they have there over at Baxter.
Yeah, let's listen to this clip because there's as we said, we focus so much on innovation and travel costs and such, but this is good. COVID is introducing some new costs that may be with us for a long time. So let's listen.
Yeah, Matt, maybe I'll make some commentary, but we will stop short of doing line item cost review. From an overall standpoint, you're right. Expedited freight is an important and significant driver. One of the things that we had to do is because we were seeing higher levels of absenteeism, we were also having to hire temporary workers to mitigate that shortfall in employees. And so that was another expense that we've experienced. PPE is another expense. Now, this will be more ongoing, so we'll look to manage this as effectively as we can because, frankly, I think that PPE will be here to stay in manufacturing facilities. And then, like I said, overtime and incremental bonuses for frontline workers, those others comprise the majority of the spending that we've experienced. It's important when you get back to our priorities. Number one, employees safe. Number two, continuity of life-saving supply. We have to ensure that, and we've done that. And so we're proud of the progress there, but we're mindful that there has been a real economic cost associated with this, and we will look to manage this down as quickly and swiftly as we can. Can I give you a timeline in terms of exactly when? If the pandemic were to end today, should we be able to recoup the vast majority of those expenses in next year's budget? I believe the answer is yes, but we'll have to go through our budget process. And clearly, the pandemic is not ending today. This is going to be with us for a time, and it's going to be with us in terms of, level of severity. So, that's maybe some color for you on this $150 million.
So number 5 is a big one to everyone in medtech. I mean, obviously, we have not been able to do our device talks meetings due to the pandemic. And even more importantly, perhaps to our industry, medtech companies can't attend clinical meetings. There are no clinical meetings, and they have trouble getting in the hospital. So we've heard from smaller companies like Explorer Surgical and Avail sort of setting up different tools and digital systems to connect medical device companies to physicians and to hospitals. But the big companies are stepping up as well. In this first clip, we're going to hear from Chris Barry. He is the CEO of NuVasive, and he's asked by Matt Miksic of Credit Suisse just what NuVasive is doing to engage physicians. Let's listen.
This has been I think a bright spot for us as an organization. The work specifically with our clinical professional development team, NuVasive, I think we prided ourselves on providing top-notch education and support to our surgeon partners and the clinical staff. And we've done that historically through, one-on-one engagements, people coming on site in San Diego, us going to the hospital setting, and clearly that was a limitation or basically was an impediment for us delivering that support and continuing that education. So, the team was very creative. We really, I think, accelerated our online capability and our digital capability with the webinar series that the team developed, our ongoing virtual training sessions, all of those things. I mean, the numbers were incredible to me, and the receptivity of our surgeons and their response to it has been overwhelmingly positive. So that has also driven what we're now seeing, which is a much more, let's just say, vetted surgeon population. And our request for one-on-one training has never been higher. Chris
Barry's comments were echoed by others, including Mike Mahoney at Boston Scientific.
So, they're setting up these digital platforms, now to, help them contact and advise physicians more. And, you got to think they must be doing it as well, just with how they, the top medtech executives, network among themselves, because they're still, our next point here is how they're still in the market for M&A opportunities and investments. I'd love to be in on a Zoom call where somebody's talking about buying somebody else's company for $1 billion or two. That would be pretty wild.
No kidding. That would be a great conversation to be on. Well, we've heard from a few folks on the quarterly calls. Kevin Lobo, of course, of Stryker, we heard from him. He had said that Stryker will continue to look for tuck-in M&As. Michael Mahoney at Boston Scientific, he also said that Boston Scientific is still in the market. They're actually making more venture investments, later stage investments in their existing portfolio. They're really beefing up that. But they're also looking for deals opportunistically. And next we'll hear from Roland Diggelman, the CEO of Smith & Nephew. He was asked how he views the overall M&A market. Let's listen.
Thank you, Kyle. I'll just start with your last question on M&A. I would first want to mention that our M&A strategy remains unchanged. We continue to look for technologies and innovation that fit with our general strategy that we can leverage for our existing commercial footprint. We continue to look very actively in the marketplace. There may be some distressed assets here and there, but what we want to maintain is a clear strategic approach here, and also have the ability actually to be seen as a good owner out in the market. We have made 5 acquisitions last year. I think this has really been, I would say, a watershed moment for us as an organization. So we continue to be interested in M&A, of course, and while initially, of course, the focus was on liquidity and cash flow, we have a very solid balance sheet, and that is a positive.
Okay, so M&A is still in the air. That's great to hear. We're going to revisit sort of the outpatient setting again. We talked earlier about the move toward interventional technology, but one other thing that has come up in these conversations, and interventional is more of a technical, I guess, conversation, but from the marketplace, big companies or that are selling big, expensive items are seeing more and more interest from ambulatory surgery centers, smaller surgery centers in that are outside of the hospitals.
Especially true in the ortho space. I mean, that's been considered like kind of like the next big thing for a few years. So yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting trend, and gosh, it looks like that too is accelerating, amid the pandemic.
Exactly. And we're going to hear from a few companies. We'll start off again. We're hearing from them a lot, but Kevin Lobo of Stryker says the numbers are still small, but they're growing. So let's listen.
Yeah, sure, Matt. We're not going to get into specific numbers as we stop providing that, as you know, a couple of quarters ago. But I would tell you that we had slightly higher competitive placements than we had typically before, and a bit more activity in the ASCs. And we've been selling to the ASCs before, so that's not new. But clearly, there is an accelerating trend towards the ASCs. It was already starting to ramp, and I think the pandemic is causing that to increase further. Keep in mind, there's still only about 5 to 10% of joint replacement procedures done in ASCs. So even though the ramp is picking up, it's going to take time before it becomes a very meaningful portion of procedures. But I would say those are the 2 areas that were higher than normal, was ASCs and competitive accounts.
Hey, Chris, and to your point about this being a push tied to orthopedics, we're going to hear now from Roland Diggelman. He is the CEO of Smith & Nephew. We heard from him just a few minutes ago. And he is also seeing an increased interest in or from ASCs. So let's hear what he has to say.
It's still a small number, of course, because the majority of the capacity is in the central hospitals. I would say for us, it is close to about 10% of our knee sales. It is a higher proportion, I believe, than for others. And it has, and I think that's the more important message, is we've seen a good growth in ASCs during this crisis, albeit at the low level because the entire volumes were depressed. But we continue to see this trend evolving, and we feel that we're very well positioned to benefit from the move to decentral and ambulatory.
Kevin Lobo's last comments about the strength of the Mako surgical system largely reflects the positive feelings about the robotics surgery industry. Robot makers, including Stryker, including Smith & Nephew, were positive going forward, even with the pressures presented by the pandemic, that will continue to place systems into hospitals. One of the biggest pieces of news, of course, belongs to Johnson & Johnson. In July, the company announced that it decided not to follow a 510K clearance pathway for its general surgery robot, but instead would follow a more intensive PMA process. So this puts off the development or the testing of the robotic system for a few years. And in this clip, we hear from Johnson & Johnson's CEO, Alex Gorski. He says that the company is still very excited about the sector and explains some of the thought into the delay.
First of all, I just want to restate our excitement about the overall digital space. And when we look at the potential of this market, currently being less than 5% penetrated, and understandably, that's indicative of some markets in the United States at well over 50% for certain procedures, but on a global basis, we think there is just tremendous growth opportunity. Two, if you just look at the acceleration of technology that we're also seeing, and clearly that's been the driving force behind our investment, both in RS but also our partnership with Verb and Verily, and as we brought those different capabilities, those different technologies together, I think it's actually reinforced the potential and the possibilities that we see in surgery for the future. And I also think it's important to note that we continue to see really good uptake with our Monarch system. We're going to expand the system with multiple specialty applications, with endourology next in line for U.S. approval for the treatment of kidney stones. And that market in itself is about twice the size of where we are today. We're making good progress, even with, as our teams deal with the COVID-19 situation on the general surgery robotic platforms, and that's for both Verb and RS. We think that it clearly enhances not only the capabilities, but our value proposition and our ability long-term to really create and launch a differentiated platform. As Joe, or I believe Chris may have alluded to earlier in their points, we continue to have ongoing conversations with regulatory authorities around the world. We will not be following a 510K regulatory pathway for the U.S. And after analyzing time to market compared to the overall value proposition, look, our goal is to initiate first-in-human studies with our robotic solution in the second half of 2022. And again, we think there is significant potential. We continue to be impressed by the technology advancements that we're seeing with both the Verb and Verily and the RS combination. Our teams are making very good progress, as we speak, and we'll be providing more information as well on our digital, and we'll be providing you some further updates regarding a more focused digital review in the coming months. So stay tuned, but I think we're as excited as ever about the possibility and the potential in this market.
All right, Chris, let's run down our list. Number 10, settlement of litigation. Number 9 is the power of incumbency. Number 8, we talked about how hospitals are hurting but finding a way. Number 7 was the move to interventional technology. 6 was COVID-related costs. 5, the building of digital outreach to physicians. Number 4, the presence of M&A opportunities. Number 3, the rise of ambulatory surgery centers. Number 2, the state of robotics. And what is our last, final, and number 1 COVID-related trend, Chris?
I'm really now for, our final point, it's really about uncertainty here. That's really, in my experience, covering business for the past decade. That's the one word that business people hate the most is, to say that there's uncertainty, but, the pandemic certainly is, all about that. Who knows when, the next, wave is going to pop up? Who knows, when we're going to get, vaccines or treatments that could, make the pandemic more manageable. And so, we've seen this trend that, a lot of companies, they're not issuing guidance for the rest of the year, but, that hasn't stopped analysts from, asking, the CEOs anyway for some guidance. And
that's right. Analysts can keep asking the questions, but the CEOs understandably are reticent to give much specifics in terms of guidance or any kind of forecasting. But I really enjoyed this exchange between Rick Wise and, again, Kevin Lobo of Stryker in concluding Stryker's analyst call, or at least during the middle of it, actually. But it felt like a good conclusion point for this podcast. Rick asked a great question as to how we should see Stryker in this case going forward, but I think it was an answer that can be carried over to other companies. So let's hear from Rick Wise asking a question to Kevin Lobo of Stryker.
You said in your opening comments something like we're prepared to emerge from the pandemic a stronger, more efficient company, and I obviously see no reason to doubt that. And you're highlighting cutting discretionary spend, et cetera, focusing on the pipeline. But I'm just curious what that means in your mind and how we should hear you. Are you saying, Rick, as we get, or to all of us, as we get back to a more normal procedure environment, we're going to grow as we did and our margins are going to be what they were? Or are you saying something more that you're trying to position the company to grow even faster with even better margins because you're taking special actions, special initiatives to plan for that? You see what I'm asking?
Oh, I know exactly what you're asking. And my CFO on my Zoom screen is waving his head saying, please don't give guidance. And so, Rick, what I would tell you, I'll give you some qualitative commentary. So the qualitative commentary is what the pandemic has provided us is really shown us how effective we can be without having to be the high-cost, high-travel company we've been historically. We're a very high-touch culture. We're realizing that there's a lot that we can do virtually that will be permanent. There's a lot of education, med ed, that some of it you have to do in person, cadaver lab type, but there's others that you can do very, very effectively and efficiently virtually. The buildings and facilities that we have, we're going to embrace flexible work arrangements going forward, and we are not going to need the same real estate by any stretch that we have today. And a lot of our CapEx over the past few years has been on office buildings, and because of our growth and all the headcount we've been adding and all the companies we've been acquiring. And frankly, we're seeing a big change in what's going to be required in the future. So those are all areas on the efficiency front. And what I would tell you is this pandemic has shrunk our company. Our divisions are collaborating more than ever. And I think the nature of the pandemic has caused our divisions to work more together. And that's sort of one of the untapped assets of Stryker is as we collaborate. We're seeing it with our ASC offense. We're seeing it with the 3D printing. We're seeing it with sort of technology areas where different divisions can tap into enabling technologies as an example. And we're collaborating better than we ever have before. And I think that will continue once we go back to, let's say, a more normal environment. And it's really unleashing a different kind of potential. So I can't put a fine point on numbers related to this, Rick, but I am feeling tremendous momentum in the company. And the culture is very strong. And these changes are going to make us better as an organization going forward. How we use those efficiencies that we generate, it certainly gives me confidence that we'll get back to the nice op margin expansion you saw over the past couple of years. That gives us tremendous confidence we can continue that. But I think there's some untapped potential in our divisions and through collaboration that we're going to start to see manifest itself in our results.
All right, Chris. Well, it's evident that no one can predict the future, but we can find you on social media, can't we, Chris?
Yes, you can find me on social media, on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Newmarker, just like a new marker. Always happy to chat with people.
And I'm also available on the social media. I am on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. I'm on Twitter at medtech Tom. And please do share this podcast. Look for a write-up. We'll have a write-up, Chris, on which of our news sites will we have this wrap-up, this summation.
We will have this wrap up on medical design and outsourcing, and we'll be doing a little stub of it on Mass Device too, so you can catch it on both of the sites.
Fantastic. So folks can share this podcast. They can look for that article and share that as well. Make sure you tag Chris and I when you do that. And please don't forget to subscribe to Device Talks Weekly. It's been a joy to bring this to you every week. We'd love to, we'll continue to do that. We want to make sure you're one of the first to get it. So push the subscribe button. We're on Spotify. We're on Podcast Player for Apple. Everywhere you need us to be, we're there. Make sure you do what you need to do to get these future episodes sent directly to your listening device. And that's it, folks. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast for you.
Take care. Stay healthy.